The clock is ticking, which means it is time for the College Football Power Hour. I am Caroline Fenton. He is Adam Breneman. And that over there is Jason Fitz. What a week 3 in college football. We had a game canceled because of whooping cough. Florida State lost again at home to Memphis, but we start with the biggest game of the day. Number 1, Georgia goes to Kroger Field and just barely ekes out a win against Kentucky. They win that 113-12. Adam, what were some of your biggest takeaways from this one?
Well, my first one is wow. I mean, can you imagine if Georgia wouldn't have pulled this one out? It was a game that going into this weekend, I knew would be a fun one to watch, but had no expectation this would be a close one, especially, I mean, guys, Kentucky got absolutely embarrassed against South Carolina last week. So this is the Kentucky team that got ran off the field against SC. A few things that I think led to what we saw in the 1-point win by the number 1 team in the country. Georgia's first road game of the season. First road game always causes some kind of things go wrong. You're not used to traveling. You don't do it at all until as a team until your first road game. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that, yes, Kentucky got beat down by South Carolina, but Kentucky's also an extremely well-coached team. Mark Stoops is a great coach. And I think there's something to be said about when you get embarrassed, coming back and kind of having a Super Bowl-type game and moment against the number 1 team in the country. And then the third is I don't see a Georgia offense that is dynamic enough to put up a ton of points. And clearly their offensive line didn't play well. I didn't think Carson Beck played very well. He missed a couple throws, a couple explosive plays got left on the field because of some missed throws by Carson Beck. Those 3 things happen. You're not going to beat a ton of teams, and you're not going to dominate many teams in the SEC, and that's what we saw. I did think this game was one of the more scrappy, toughest games I've watched in a while. I mean, some of those hits we were seeing, playing through the whistle, it was big-time SEC football. That was fun to watch. But now we sit here, number 1 team in the country, wins by 1 point against Kentucky. It kind of opens up the top few spots in college football, Fitz. I mean, you got Georgia, Texas, Alabama with a huge win against Wisconsin we'll talk about. I mean, Ohio State, who really is the number 1 team? It's up for grabs.
Especially this early in the season. And the crazy thing about this game is this game was about one drive. Like, there was one effective offensive drive for Georgia that resulted in a touchdown, and that's all it took. And that's staggering to me. So when you think about sort of offensive ineptitude, and then you combine that with the eye test, like if I had an AP vote right now, it'd be really hard for me to put Georgia ahead of Texas, who looked as good as they did with their backup quarterback in for much of the game. For Alabama, that had an awakening today in the butt kicking at Camp Randall. Like that's a game we respect the location on too. Like you think about just the eye test, Ohio State has looked good. There's this moment for Georgia where it's like, man, you did that against Kentucky? Like, not all 13, 12 games are created equal. We can all remember when LSU, Alabama, with the big defensive game years ago that they still talk about was like one of the best games of all. This was not that. This was 2 teams that offensively just couldn't get any rhythm going. And even Kirby Smart acknowledged to Molly McGrath when she asked, how do you get this offense better? He's like, we got to block guys. What are we doing if Georgia isn't blocking guys? Because those are all 5 stars that are huge human beings that know what they're supposed to do with a great coaching staff around them. It felt like an uninspired effort, and we forgive that from most teams in a trap game or against a cupcake, all of those things. Georgia, Kentucky, like, this is still an SEC game that should have meant something. I think Georgia was lucky to come out with the win, and I would be stunned if they're the number 1 team in the country tomorrow.
And look, that's a testament to the standard that Georgia football has set for itself under Kirby Smart. And I think today was a reminder to me, maybe to all of us, of just how much talent Georgia has to replenish every single year. And it specifically showed to me at the wide receiver position, or just pass catchers in general. Yeah. No Marcus Rosemy-Jackson, no Brock Bowers, no Ladd McConkey. We saw, I think, a clear lack of chemistry between Carson Beck and the receivers on different pages. The timing was off. That's what I think Georgia needs to resolve moving forward throughout the rest of the season if they are going to stay, the number 1 team in the country, even in the top 3.
I totally agree with everything you said, but we can't have our cake and eat it too. Because on this show, we've talked about how Georgia is one of those teams that gets benefit of the doubt, that they find a way to restock the cupboards no matter what happens.
That's the standard.
It's fair to say that, like, hey, The standard, they need a little time. But also a couple weeks ago, it's like, well, Georgia never needs time. They figure it out. So, like, yes, are they victim to their own standard? Absolutely. But that's part of why they're Georgia. That's part of why they get the benefit of the doubt. And that's part of why right now, today, like, it doesn't mean Georgia's season's lost. They're undefeated. They'll be fine. But it does mean today, right now, if we're asked who the number one team in the country is, Adam, well, Georgia certainly didn't look better today and hasn't looked better so far this season than a team like Texas.
And let's not forget that Kentucky was almost up 10-0 in the second quarter in this game. And when there was a pick six that got called back when the pass got called incomplete. Kentucky took it back to the house and they got taken off the board. So this game could have gotten out of hand. 10-0's a lot of points in a game when Georgia can't move the ball and can't throw the ball down the field. So this thing could have gone south quickly. Caroline, you mentioned the passing game and the receivers, the vertical passing game. I thought with Carson Beck, there's not enough creativity in the passing game at all. It's 5-step drop back, and which puts your quarterback in tough spots. Like when you're in 5-step drop back, you got to read the whole field. You got to see coverage, see pressure, especially when your offensive line isn't blocking well. Like I would have loved to see just some quick, easy completions from Carson Beck. Get your receivers, to your point, not a ton of great receivers or athletes out there to get the ball to, but get your receivers the ball in space, let them go make plays. I would just like to see more creativity in this passing game. If there's one positive
Adam,
for Georgia to take.
Real quick, Adam, stick there for a second, because a lot of people may not understand that. And frankly, I didn't until I talked to a lot of quarterbacks. Like, the advantage to being in shotgun is when you get the ball, you're not worried about anything other than reading what's in front of you. So to your point, asking Carson to drop back 5 steps is asking for a different processing from your quarterback than, for example, Arch or Quinn or any of those guys like Jalen's doing when they're in shotgun a bunch. Like that drop back really does change what you're asking a quarterback to process as they process things.
It really does. You either have like quick game where you're catching and throwing right away. You have the 5-step drop back where you have more time and you're passing the ball on the field, or you have like play action where you got a play fake, which I want to see Georgia do more of as well. And just the variety of all three, I think, would have been great to see. At the end of the day, for an offensive coordinator, your most important job in the first quarter of the game is to get your quarterback in rhythm, get him confidence, get Carson Beck feeling good. It's like being a 3-point shooter. Like you're just trying to get your guy a make early in the game, right? You're trying to like get him set up and let him make a few shots so he starts feeling good. And I didn't think they did a great job of that early in this game. Now it was a little funky. The drive, they weren't sustaining drives, so there weren't a ton of opportunities. But Carson Beck has to play better and has to be able to push the ball down the field if they want to win football games. And then I think the other benefit, or if there is one positive for Georgia to take away here, is that you found a way to win and you were trailing most of this game. Georgia is not used to trailing in games at all. There was a stat the broadcast showed, which I forget the exact number, but Carson Beck played like 10 snaps in his career while he was losing in the game so far
17.
Up until this game. 17, yeah. 17.
That's crazy.
So that's crazy, right? So for most of the players at Georgia to feel what it feels like to be losing and to not fold and to come back and win, is a benefit, and Kirby Smart can look at and say, okay, that was a good experience for our players to have, for Carson Beck to have. We found a way to win. It wasn't pretty, but that experience will help Georgia down the line in SEC playing in the College Football Playoff.
Good teams find ways to win. Georgia found a way to win today. It reminded me a lot of that Georgia game at Missouri a couple of years ago. And this was a 6-6, 7-5 Missouri team, not the 10-2 team that we saw this past season from Missouri. And Georgia just kind of played with their food. Georgia just kind of sat back and didn't do Georgia things. And we saw Georgia pull out a gutsy, ugly win, but a win is a win. And there was a big one happening at Camp Randall today. Alabama takes down the Badgers. After kind of an ugly win last week against USF, at least through 3 quarters, 4th quarter, Alabama broke away. I was interested to see the response. And Fitz, we saw quite the response from Alabama today at Wisconsin.
Fitz, what'd you see, Fitz?
I'm the first to admit when I'm right.
What'd you see, Fitz?
And I'm the first to admit when I'm wrong. And let me tell you,
Alabama hater Jason Fitz.
I watched that.
I've been
Is your
looking
legal
forward to this
name?
all day. I've been thinking about this all day, Caroline. I've been thinking about this segment.
The whole time. I watched it and I thought, man, I don't know what's worse, that I was wrong or that I'm going to have to admit I was wrong over and over and over again to you two. Because like y'all have been saying it.
After the last 2 weeks of you stroking your ego about how right you were about everything.
That's fair. That's fair.
You can't have it both ways.
Bring
if you
it
want
back
credit,
down
you're
to earth.
This time I came crashing down because this was such a Herculean effort. Like, this felt like Mike Tyson in his prime. Okay, like Mike Tyson in his prime would go in and just beat the snot out of you right away, and there was nothing you could do about it. You could prep for it all day long. There was nothing you could do about it. Every single mistake that Wisconsin made, and don't get it twisted, they made a ton of them. A lot of self-inflicted errors in this game. And every single time they made one, the counterpunch was a knockout punch over and over and over again. And you just talk about the ease with which Alabama did that. Their ability to walk up and down the field. It felt like the environment didn't matter to them at all. Jalen Milroe looked like the best player in the country today. Like, Jalen Milroe had such control in everything he was doing, and you just watched this dynamic passing attack that was hitting you on multiple levels, and then Jalen would run with it, and it's like, how the hell do you stop it? I was amazed. Adam, you've been big that, hey, this is going to be just fine. And I've been big that no, this culture change, all these things, it's going to cost them a couple of games. It's just going to happen. I walked away from this today saying, my God, I don't know how you beat this version of Bama. Yeah, take a shot. Culture, I need to take a shot for what I just watched because, my God, Bama was just, that was a sort of butt whooping that with finesse that just absolutely opened your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing we learned from that game is that Alabama is a real national title contender. They're a contender to be the number one team in the country. In Wisconsin, for all the issues that Wisconsin has, clearly from this game, they're still a good football team, and that's a tough place to go into and play. And to me, the most impressive thing, the thing that was most encouraging to see out of Alabama was just a squeaky clean performance in a rowdy road environment. After a lot of talk after being in a close game with South Florida, to come back out of that week, have the week of prep, and to go on your first road trip, which you just talked about with how that impacts things. Your first road trip with Kalen DeBoer, to perform the way they did, and just have no mistakes, and to not turn the football over, and to play the way they did shows most of all the coaching job by that coaching staff and how they can get guys ready to play and perform at a high level. And just, I think gives excitement about the future of Alabama. Also, you just mentioned it, Fitz. Alabama has an elite quarterback, one of the best in the country. And I think there have been questions around it, but Jalen Milroe is elite, and Alabama with an elite quarterback is going to be dangerous. And then add in their defense that, held Wisconsin to 3 of 15 or 14 on third down. They were impressive and got after the quarterback and stopped the run, and were just really good all around. So this was a complimentary, complete football team we saw against Wisconsin.
Also, it's funny to me. I'll never forget Mike Golick Jr. telling me when Notre Dame played Alabama in the national championship game. He said, when you walked off the bus, you saw how big they were, how tough they were. And it's true. Like, for all of the conversation, they beat you off the bus. Like, Alabama had that for a long time. I thought that would be gone. When you watch this performance, man, they're going to beat you off the bus again. Like, there's a level of explosiveness and layers and levels to what they do offensively that I just feel like this was the sort of win, Caroline, that just instills fear in the hearts of everybody around college football.
I think we all kind of, well, maybe not all of us, Fitz, you did not think this. I think we all kind of thought that there was something there that Alabama could be a national title contender, but with all of the change, with how many players they lost in the transfer portal, losing the greatest coach in the history of college football, it's fair to have questions about what that transition looks like. How do you restock the cupboard? How quickly can Kalen DeBoer come in and establish his culture, and also the X's and O's of it all, the offense that Kalen DeBoer is bringing in as well? How quickly can things mesh? How quickly can Kalen DeBoer come in and establish what he wants this football program to be, what he wants this football team to be? And I think it was the response after last week, and also just what we saw on full display in the passing game. We saw Ryan Williams look like one of the better pass catchers in the SEC, maybe even in college football, and he's supposed to be a senior in high school right now. And I think what is really scary to me from Alabama is how much variety they have in the running game between Justice Haynes and Jam Miller, and what Jalen Milroe can do with his legs. On any given day, any three of those guys can make plays with their legs.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. One of the interesting things that Kalen DeBoer talked about in his post-game press conference was how there's just these intricacies of his offense and of what they do as a program that it takes time to build out with. And we talked about it on the show, just it takes time to understand what's going on. And some part of it is the run game you're talking about, Caroline, the ability to use different players. And they were changing, Alabama was changing personnel groupings a ton in this game. That part of that is operation. Just the pure operation of people knowing who should be on the field, who comes off the field, what are the signals, what's the sideline operation like, how are we going to travel as a team on a road game, how do we get Jalen Milroe the ball and get him comfortable and understand that he can run the football and use that +1 run game. All those things take time, and I thought DeBoer's comment about it showed some self-awareness, and he talked about how, listen, against South Florida, we learned a lot of things, and there's also things you can't replicate. Like, you can't replicate what it's going to be like communicating with your quarterback with the headset communication in a live game when you're on the road and you don't know where you're standing on the bench and it's not familiar to your players and your team. Those things you can't replicate, and the fact that Alabama came out and played the way they did, I think says a lot.
When you can run the football in interesting ways out of so many different formations also, it makes it so hard to defend. Right? Like, this isn't one of those line it up, you're in I formation, you're just going to slam it up the middle. Like, the amount of exotic run formations that they have is just, that's going to be a challenge. This is going to take the amount of film study their opponents are going to have to do. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful win, Caroline. I couldn't have been more wrong. I like, this crow's never tasted better because I watched beautiful football, but my God, what a win.
It was nice to see some beautiful football. It felt like vintage Bama because we saw some not great football, and the sky is falling a lot of places across the country. And this almost feels like a mainstay on the program. This feels like a constant thing that we're going to bring up every single week when we talk about wherever the sky is falling. Is the sky is falling in Tallahassee after Florida State drops 0-3 when they lost to Memphis today at home. It's the first time ever in AP poll history that a preseason top 10 team starts the season 0-3. And it's not even just, you lose those games, that's bad enough. I don't see where there's hope on this Florida State team. I don't see where there's any sort of, silver lining or a little glimmer of sunshine behind this dark storm cloud. This team's just bad.
Yeah. I mean, that locker room is gone, Caroline. I mean, I don't know how you recover that locker room, which is filled with a bunch of transfers at Florida State. They're going to look around at each other and say, well, what are we doing? I mean, we transferred into Florida State, and we now have lost to Georgia Tech in Ireland. We've lost to Boston College with an NIL budget of about $800,000 a year compared to our 13 million. And we've lost to Memphis, where our head coach came from. I mean, it's embarrassing. And, Florida State's got a roster they're paying $13 million to, but they have $12 million plus the problems they got to figure out right now. And the hard part for Mike Norvell is that these players and all these transfers are going to look around and say, we came in here, it's not working out, should we go somewhere else, right? And how do you not lose the locker room for the rest of the season? Because right now you're just playing for pride. I mean, the truth of the matter, in my opinion, is that yes, the sky is falling at Florida State, but Florida State's not going to fire Mike Norvell. I don't think so. I mean, the amount of money left on his contract with the buyout he has, I think it's fair. There's certainly alarms about Florida State's future. Does not look good, but Mike Norvell still has to find a way to figure this thing out. And the locker room right now, I know, is looking around at each other because I've been in those settings and saying, where do we go from here? This is going to be the toughest challenge of Mike Norvell's coaching career, without a doubt. How he handles the next 8+ weeks of the college football season and trying to figure out how to put a competitive product on the field, because that's what it's about now.
But how many times over the course of the beginning of our show together have we talked about certain things become a case study for everybody else? And this is a case study of exactly what you said, Adam, because when you go to the transfer portal and you bring in all the mercenaries you can to win a bunch of games and you don't win, now what do? Mike Norvell lost this locker room his first year with Florida State, and it became a large story. Now, I loved what he did at Memphis, but his first year at Florida State, he lost the locker room. Then they started winning football games. Everybody became comfortable. Now, all of a sudden, they're losing. He loses the locker room again. Now we have a problem. I'm with you. The buyout makes it virtually impossible for Norvell to be fired and have anybody be comfortable with it. But at the same time, if I'm Florida State, I'm looking around right now saying, is this going to be our future every year? Are we going to simply go to the transfer portal every year and hope to God that doesn't happen to us again next year? Like, that's not the way to build a program.
one of the biggest takeaways from watching the Florida State game was just thinking about, man, the consequences of success sometimes are strong. And when you win and go 12-0 and have the kind of season Florida State had, and you don't have a program that's built for long-term success, what happens? You lose Jordan Travis. Your team thinks they're great. A bunch of players go to the NFL. You bring in some transfers, you lose some transfers, and then you get smacked the next year. And like that's what happens when you win a lot of football games. And then add in, if you miss on a quarterback in the transfer portal, you go from 12-0 to 0-3. That's what happens. If you don't bring in a good quarterback, and DJU, for all the success he's had, is playing some bad football right now, you go from 12-0 to 0-3. And now the mission for Mike Norvell is, how do you win 6 games? You got to try to win 6 games. And
that speaks to what Caroline said, though. Like, there is no hope because they're not sitting there saying, hey, don't worry, it's our young quarterback. They're like, if Nebraska had started terrible, they could still turn around and say, hey, Rayola's going to be the star. We got it. Like, they don't have that, Caroline. Like, there's nothing. If you're Norvell right now, the only hope you can tell people is that it's too expensive to fire me, so you just got to deal with it.
At least at Florida, because this guy is, on the ground in the state of Florida everywhere other than Miami, because Florida's got their own issues. At least Florida fans can hold on to their young quarterback, DJ Lagway, and say, we're excited about the future of DJ Lagway, that he's going to be the future, that's their hope, that they can look at this young quarterback and say, okay, that's our future. You don't have that, at least not to that level at Florida State. It's really difficult, I can imagine, to try and rebuild a roster through the transfer portal with players coming from different experiences, playing in different systems, in different locker rooms, and you're trying to make all of these pieces fit together in a puzzle, and you don't really know if the pieces fit. But Nick Saban said it on College Game Day. Well, if you pay the wrong guys, then you're a bleep out of luck. And that's what I think we're seeing on full display at Florida State, is that the transfer portal can giveth, but the transfer portal also can taketh away very, very quickly. But my question for you, Adam, is, you say they're not going to fire Mike Norvell. I'm with you. They're not going to fire Mike Norvell, but should they?
It's a good question. I'm not prepared to say that Mike Norvell should be fired right now. I think when you look at the job he did last season and you look at where Florida State is as a program, with almost unprecedented success last year and going 12-0, that it's too soon to make a change as that quick after the guy did what he did last season. I think it's hard to look at the situation without looking at all of the finances that go into it, and the buyout situation, and the fact that he's been extended 2 times. I think it's tough to separate the two. But say that they could fire Norvell tomorrow, I don't think they should. I think they should let him ride this out and see what kind of season comes of it. I still think there's a way that they can have a somewhat respectable season. We'll be nowhere close to what they wanted at preseason. But I just don't. I'm not ready to say they should move on from Mike Norvell completely. And the other question is, who would replace Mike Norvell that would put them in a better spot than they are right now? And if the answer is a guy like Alex Golish at South Florida, if the answer is a guy, let's see how those guys perform this season. Because whenever you fire someone, you got to think about who's replacing them, and that person give us a better chance?
It's right there. I mean, let's see. The wheels go off on this season. Everything falls apart. They got to come up with a huge buyout. In the meantime, last time I checked, 2 kids named Sanders, or, we'll see what happens to them next at Colorado. Shedeur goes to the NFL. Dion all of a sudden now looks around and says, I don't know, do I really want to keep doing this in Colorado? And then all of a sudden they back up the Brinks truck to bring Dion home to Florida State, and then he becomes the home sensation. Like, this is a Disney movie waiting to happen. Like, Norvell has to look, every time he loses a game, he has to think, man, I hope Dion really likes skiing, because as long as he wants to stay in Colorado, fine. But the minute he wants to go to Florida State, they're going to hire him.
But we're also talking about a guy in Mike Norvell that went 12-0 last season and had a historic season at Florida State. So we're not even a year removed from that. So I still
agree.
think we have to look back at that.
Common sense, you're right. Now, common sense, you're right. But common sense doesn't exist in college football. Come on.
Yeah. No, it really doesn't. Caroline, you mentioned the Florida job. I think we should just say sky is falling anywhere north of like South Florida. Like anywhere northern Florida is just. Listen, I think the guy that should be fired is Billy Napier, and I think I heard someone say this on the air today, and it's a great point. It I kind of related it in my head to like when you're dating. They say when you know. Like, when you get the feeling, I mean, everyone around Florida has had the feeling for a long time now that Billy Napier is not the answer.
Breneman, are you going to ask me to marry you? Is this about to happen?
You
guys want to talk relationship advice? Yeah.
That's why we came here, for the love doctor.
I mean, Breneman's about to propose to me. I didn't wear anything nice.
You guys don't know.
I get my nails done. But it is true, because my point about Mike Norvell, if buyouts didn't exist and money wasn't a thing and Florida State fired Mike Norvell tomorrow, what does that do? Realistically, are you going to turn your season around after falling 0-3? Like, the quarterback's still an issue. The roster is still the issue. I don't know what that realistically does for not just this team this season, but this program. But Billy Napier, the writing's been on the wall for a long time. Year one, you got the benefit of the doubt because the cupboard was completely empty. That Dan Mullen didn't do a whole lot of recruiting, and you got the benefit of the doubt there. Fine, we'll make it some excuses. Year two, you didn't make any sort of improvement. Year three, all of the improvement that should have been made in year two was just steps back, and no longer can you use the excuse of, well, he didn't have any talent to work with, because that's what he was hired to do. And by year three, you need to start seeing those improvements. But Florida State feeling the woes of a successful season last year. Michigan kind of feeling the same thing a little bit, but at least Michigan fans have a national championship to keep them warm at night. Florida State had one of the best seasons in a long time since the Jameis Winston national championship in, what was that, 2012? And they don't even have a trip to the playoff to show for it. Brutal. Where else is the sky falling, Fitz?
I think you got all of it. Like,
it's Tallahassee and it's Gainesville, and that's it.
That's it. Like, Florida, I think we've hit all of the skies falling that there is there. I mean, we brought everybody down.
Good. I mean, that game, which is normally one of the best, most exciting games of the season, Florida against Florida State, like that game might be on Nickelodeon. Like, that game might not even be like on cable television. And you're just going to have to give it away for free on some sort of streaming platform, because no one in this country is paying to watch that football game. It's going to be absolutely brutal. We're going to take a quick break. One thing that we learned from week 3 coming up next here on Pod. All right, back here on the Pod. Week 3, Adam, what'd we learn?
Well, I think we got to give credit to Notre Dame. And I learned that Notre Dame's loss against NIU in week 2 was a fluke. Listen, anytime that you go out and beat a Big Ten team 66-7 on the road, you got to give credit to the program, to the head coach, Marcus Freeman, and just to what Notre Dame is doing and how they bounced back from pretty much being the laughing stock of the country last week. I think a few things impressed me about Notre Dame. First, the dominance in all 3 phases of that game. I mean, dominated on the offense, dominated on defense, played great on special teams after a rough week last week on special teams. The running back, Jeremiah Love, played well. Riley Leonard, I thought, looked really good. The second thing is really just the mentality and the urgency issues against NIU looked like they were fixed against Purdue. In a rivalry game, they came to play. And Marcus Freeman last week admitted that the team, he thought they were a little bit lackadaisical, clearly, with how they lost, but just not really knowing how to handle the week 1 success against Texas A&M. And I thought that was fixed, obviously, this week. And then Riley Leonard, in his versatility, ran the football really well, was a game changer with his feet. And I think when he brings that dual threat ability and is kind of brings that athleticism people didn't know he always had to this Notre Dame offense, they got a chance to be really good. So now Notre Dame's in the driver's seat with a loss to NIU. You look at their schedule; they got Louisville, Georgia Tech, Florida State, USC. They're likely to win out. They'll probably be favored in all those games, and all the Power 4 teams will have a conference championship game, or 2 of them in each conference. Notre Dame's going to have the playing game against USC, their last game of the year, and there's a pretty good likelihood they're going to be 10-1 playing that game against USC for a spot in the college football playoff.
But that's the whole problem here, man, because everything you just said is so true and so right and so smart. And also the whole maddening part of this, right? Like, this is like the kid that gets in trouble in school and all of a sudden then they're really well behaved. So now everyone's like, oh, I got it. No, he's really a good kid. No, Notre Dame is not a good kid at this point. And I hear you that like they're going to have to go in and beat the snot out of everybody if they want to have any shot at the college football playoff. But we all watched this today. Like, look, I know we say whatever we want about Georgia. Alabama looks like a playoff team. Texas looks like a playoff team. Missouri looks like a playoff team. Ole Miss looks like a playoff team. Tennessee looks like a playoff team. That's just the SEC. You on this show told me that Nebraska is going to the college football playoff, which means I also got to account for Oregon, and I got to account for you. I got to account for USC if USC gets into there, right? Like I got to account for Penn State. Like the numbers are just there's too many good teams out there, so I get it.
Sorry, don't you think it's too soon though to start playing the numbers game? I know we love the numbers game. We love to think of who's in and who's out and who's on the bubble, but it's week 3. And what I know is that Notre Dame went to Texas A&M and beat the snot out of them, and then they just absolutely dominated Purdue, won by 50-some points on the road against a Big Ten opponent. That's a decent football program. They're not great, but I mean it's a
great
decent, respectable program in a rivalry game. That's what I know about Notre Dame, and with with what we've seen today in some of these close games, in the Georgia game, anything can happen. And Notre Dame, with one loss against NIU, and what we've seen, that if they play like the team today, they got a chance to win out, and then I think be in the college football playoff.
This is going to be our recurring argument every week.
Every week this should be a segment.
Like, look, and just by the way, y'all, like this isn't just on the show. Every time something happens on college football Saturday, there's a text back and forth. Breneman's like, "What are we thinking now?" And I'm doing the same thing.
I really think Caroline's on my side in this one.
Yeah, I don't know. An 11-1 Notre Dame team, I think absolutely 1,000% gets in because an 11-1 Notre Dame team has to beat USC at the end of the year. And right now, USC looks like a team that if you beat them, especially when it's recency bias and it'll be frequent, it'll be right before the committee makes up their decision about the final 12, that team gets in. But the 10-2 argument, I think, is a little bit too rich for my blood because you'll have 2 losses, one being to Northern Illinois, and one of those losses likely comes from a team that would have strengthened Notre Dame's schedule. So you can beat most of the bad teams on your schedule, but you can't beat the good ones? That's not a playoff team. And to Fitz's point, the numbers game has to come into play here at some point. Because, yes, we can make the argument all day long, 11-1 or 10-2 Notre Dame team, but what about the context? What about the seats at the table that may or may not exist for a team whose best win might be on the road at Texas A&M early in the season or, an absolute routing of Purdue? 11-1, absolutely book it. Notre Dame is in the college football playoff. 10-2 might not be enough. And that's crazy to say in a 12-team playoff when we thought a 10-2 team, Power 5 team would be getting in.
Now, I'm just going to say, an 11-1 team, a one-loss Notre Dame team, would still have one loss that's worse than any of the rest of these teams we're talking about is likely to have, and any of the rest of these teams are going to have better wins than Notre Dame can even get. So I still think a one-loss Notre Dame team is on the outside looking. This will be our never-ending argument. I will give you, as we go through one thing we learned, I will give you something, guys, that I learned today. Caroline, I went into the Alabama game. I've already eaten some crow on that. That's just going to keep happening. I will admit that I looked very wrong about Bama. Fine. The other thing that I really thought is that we would see more competent offense from Wisconsin. Like, I expected a year to jump from Fickell and from this coaching staff, and it wasn't there, man. Like, we were watching a Wisconsin team that felt a lot like Wisconsin teams every single year. They went into the transfer portal. They got themselves a quarterback. They lose that quarterback the first drive of the game. I understand what that does to an offense, but I just never got a sense that there was a rhythm in the passing attack. There was no separation from the receivers. Like, it just felt like Wisconsin's offense was just the same old meh offense we've seen. And if you want to play with the big boys in the modern college football world, you can't be meh, Carolina. I think we've learned that Wisconsin is still just middle class, middle of the pack, forgettable college football.
I'm with you there. And it felt very meh. It felt very, we are outclassed against Alabama at home. And it also felt like time and time again, Wisconsin continued to shoot themselves in the foot. Whether it was turnovers or penalties, any momentum that they may have gotten. And momentum was hard to come by for Wisconsin. It seemed like it was cut short due to just self-inflicted errors.
Yeah, and I thought too, one of the biggest things with Wisconsin and kind of the issues is that it doesn't feel like what we're used to seeing with Wisconsin football. Like Wisconsin's tried to go a little bit more to the air raid, to the passing attack. They hired Phil Longo as their offensive coordinator, and it just doesn't feel like the formula for how Wisconsin is successful. And I give credit to Luke Fickell. I give credit to him when he hired Phil Longo. Came from North Carolina to be the OC. Because I thought it was innovative, but they're just not playing good Wisconsin football. They're not running the football well. They're not winning time possession battles, and that's how Wisconsin wins football games. So I think the reality is you look at it here, and Luke Fickell's 16 or 17 games into his tenure now, and they have 9 wins. The program's not showing enough improvement, and this was, Caroline, to your point, a massive test at home against one of the best teams in the country, and to kind of come out and play the way they did and not even be competitive in the game is disappointing. And Luke Fickell's got to find a way to turn this thing around really quickly.
Yeah, which, by the way, is easier said than done. We keep talking about this with these conference expansions. Like, maybe Wisconsin just needs to accept the fact that now they're the 7th or 8th best team in their conference year in and year out, which feels icky. It doesn't feel good, but that feels more like that feels more realistic for where they are.
But I don't think they have to accept that. Look at Missouri. We are 2 years removed from Missouri being one of the worst teams in the SEC. And Fitz, you were the very person that just said that Missouri could be a college football playoff team. So no, I'm not going to sit up here and tell Wisconsin fans, accept mediocrity, accept being okay with being not very good or getting blown out at home against one of the better teams in college football. No, we're talking about Wisconsin. We're talking about an incredibly passionate fan base and a team and a program with a ton of tradition. So no. Don't accept mediocrity. Demand more. Do your thing, Wisconsin.
Look, I can roll the ball out to midcourt. I can pick it up. I can say, you know what? I demand that I dunk on this hoop. If it's more than a 6-foot hoop, I ain't getting it. That's just where Wisconsin, they can demand more, but that's not going to make them better than Ohio State or Oregon or Penn State. We keep mentioning those teams.
Why not? They've got the resources. They've got the money. We've seen a lot of traditional, storied programs in college football that have been not very good recently emerge in the NIL era.
That's fair.
USC, Texas, Tennessee, Nebraska. So many of these programs with a ton of buy-in and a ton of support and all of the resources that have underperformed over the last decade are now playoff contenders because they have the resources to get there. Now the love is being spread around more than it ever has been over the last 20, 30 years in college football. Why not Wisconsin?
You're right. And I love partying in Madison, by the way. Wisconsin, before you at me, I have had some nights I do not remember in Madison. So, look, I love that place. Go for it.
I do think one of the things with Wisconsin is that in the new Big Ten with USC and with Oregon, that they, to Fitz's point, like they are kind of a middle of the road team. I mean, Wisconsin still has to play 4 or 5 top 25 teams on their schedule this season. And to the resources question, I don't know if Wisconsin does have the resources. Like I think Luke Fickell's making probably $7-8 million a year when Lincoln Riley and James Franklin, they're making $10-11 million a year. I don't think they have the NIL support. So, James Franklin, I've heard him say a million times, I played for him, he used to always say, does the commitment match the expectation? And what is the commitment and what is the expectation at Wisconsin? Luke Fickell's got to figure it out. Maybe he needs more buy-in and commitment. Maybe there needs to be some more NIL discussions behind the scenes. But at some point, the product on the field needs to look more like the Luke Fickell we saw at Cincinnati than the Luke Fickell we're seeing right now at Wisconsin.
And I think we all thought there'd be a jump. Caroline, what did you learn today?
I learned that even without Quinn Ewers, Texas can still win a national championship.
Man.
My goodness. And I know anytime Arch Manning does anything, it's going to get a lot of buzz. Heads up, everybody. Arch Manning woke up and put his shoes on today. Let's tweet about it. But it was so deserving. So if you didn't see, Quinn Ewers, Texas starting quarterback, left the game against UTSA early. I believe they said with an abdomen injury. So wishing him nothing but the best. Hope it's a speedy recovery. But Arch Manning comes in, very first play, touchdown. Arch Manning was 9 of 12, 223 yards, 4 touchdowns, and that's just what he did through the air. He also added a 67-yard touchdown run on the ground. And we're talking about a guy who hasn't played a lot of college football. He's incredibly inexperienced, but didn't look like it. So even if Quinn Ewers is dealing with injuries, and he's had an injury history in the past, I think Texas is still in very good hands, and that's scary in the transfer portal era.
I feel like because he has the Manning last name, everyone's, and myself included, has expected Arch Manning to kind of be a stiff quarterback in the pocket. And when he turned the Jets on that 67-yard touchdown run, he must have gotten every last drop of athleticism from the Manning family and in their family genes. I mean, he
Squeezed
was rolling
every drop
of it. My favorite play that Arch Manning had was the first play that he was in. You mentioned it, Caroline, but the touchdown pass on play number 1 off the bench, cold. But that was a tough throw. He was rolling out to his right. There was a defender in his face. He didn't get a chance to set his feet and came out and ripped a dart about, 13, 14, 15 yards down the field for a touchdown. I thought to kind of come into that situation when Quinn Ewers goes down with all the hype and excitement, everyone's going to be talking about what's he doing the first play, to come out and make a throw like that, I thought was impressive and gave himself and the team a lot of confidence that led to the performance we saw today.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, I've said this repeatedly. To me, one of the most stunning things about Quinn Ewers is that he's kept Arch on the bench. And for anyone that says it's about the name, for me, it's not about the name. I'm such a logic guy. I have no emotion to any of this. I know people that were around his NIL recruitment, and the numbers that I heard were staggering. They were stunning. And when you think about the amount of money that he was given to go to Texas, I don't know how you keep that much money on the bench. And Quinn has managed to do that. So that's a statement to Quinn Ewers. But every time you see Arch do what Arch did, there's going to be a section of the fan base that is not going to have a lot of patience if Quinn hits a rough spot. A, we hope Quinn is healthy. But B, Caroline, I think you make a great point. Like, if you're Texas right now, you have something that is incredibly rare. You have a quarterback of today. You have a quarterback for tomorrow that is willing to be willing to be patient, and he is absolutely, without question, your future, and your future might even be brighter than your present. Like, that doesn't happen in the modern portal. That's part of the why Texas feels like they're not just built to be like Texas is back. Is not just about the playoffs this year. Texas is back is really about the fact that Texas looks like they're built to be a juggernaut for the next several years.
A friend of mine, Peter Burns of the SEC Network, he covered Texas's spring game. He's the best. He said that Texas has 2 Heisman caliber quarterbacks in that quarterback room. And I was like, that is the most dramatic thing that you could say. That is not no, that is such an overreaction. While I'm still not going to go quite there, I don't think that it's quite as much of an overreaction as I initially thought. Arch Manning was as advertised today against UTSA, Adam.
Yeah, isn't it a great just story of in today's age of college football, the Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning dynamic has been awesome. I mean, just for Arch to sit behind Quinn Ewers, learn, wait his turn with the NIL money, with all the excitement, with the last name, to wait his turn. And what's going to end up happening here? Hopefully, Quinn Ewers is okay. Texas is going to go play in the college football playoff. Quinn Ewers is going to go be the first quarterback drafted in next year's draft, and Arch Manning is going to take over a Texas program with a lot coming back and get a chance to do this thing the right way now that he's learned and developed. And I bet you the Arch Manning that we saw today looks very different to the coaches than the Arch Manning that walked in day one on campus, and him being patient and the support he got from his family and being able to kind of be humble in this thing is going to pay dividends for Arch Manning. And we don't see that story often in college football nowadays.
And I just think about how much better he's going to be with more reps, more experience, seeing more SEC defenses. That's assuming that he's going to be out there more this season. Maybe that's not fair if Quinn Ewers comes back healthy, but thinking about Texas in the future, I'll put money on Texas 2025 national championship odds at this point if Arch Manning's going to look like that, if not better, moving forward.
Can we coin then EU for Ewers for the teams that are going to tank this year? And then for Arch? I don't know. We're workshopping it.
Well, we're already talking NFL draft here. You can never be too prepared. You can never get too early on the action. We'll continue the conversation, hit some college football stock exchange on the other side after just a quick break. All right, college football stock exchange. Fitzy, whose stock is up for you?
Well, I mean, there's plenty of stock that's up, but I'm going to steal one. Actually, I'll start with Shedeur. I have been tough on Colorado. We all know that. I've had plenty of harsh things to say about it. And there were plenty of harsh things said about Shedeur Sanders this week in the way he handled his press conference. To me, Shedeur coming out and playing as well as he did with the noise that is around him at this point, no matter who caused the noise, and we can have that debate all day, Adam, but the noise is here and it's real. And for Shedeur to come out after he was just absolutely destroyed by so many people in the media and play a really focused, tight, accurate game, I thought was a statement to who he can be as a quarterback. Eliminate everything else. We saw the best of Shedeur today.
We did, and there's really two areas in Shedeur's game that concern me the most, and one is his accuracy and kind of throwing the ball off platform too much, and when he doesn't have to, he can throw well off platform. We've seen that, but he does it too much just for fun. It seems like when he doesn't need to. And the second is he takes too many sacks, and I thought he bounced back in a big way and improved in both those areas today against Colorado State. They put up 28 points of offense. I also just thought that he looked more in command and more like a leader and more, I bet someone was talking to him after that press conference last week. And if he has good people in his ear, which I think he does, someone was saying, you need to come out and kind of have a statement type of game where you play really well. You don't turn the football over, which he didn't. You're accurate with the football. You don't take sacks. You don't hold on the football too long. And you look like a leader. You're congratulating your teammates. You're celebrating with your teammates, and you're being, the ultimate teammate that everyone wants you to be. I thought we saw that out of Shedeur today, and we talked about it on last week's show, guys. I mean, for Shedeur, as important as it is to play for his dad and to win some games here at Colorado and to compete for a championship, he's also competing with Quinn Ewers and the other guys to be quarterback 1, 2, or 3 in the NFL draft. And all these things, especially how you bounce back when everyone in the country is talking about you, will be looked at by these NFL scouts, Caroline.
Yeah, no doubt. That was the image that stuck out to me last week. Shedeur walking off the field with 2 minutes left against Nebraska in the middle of the game, just kind of throwing his arms up like, what do you expect me to do? Like you mentioned, kind of calling out the offensive line in his post-game press conference. I was concerned that would have been a pivotal game and a pivotal moment for that Colorado team, and not in a good way, in a way of we're all giving up, the quarterback's trash talking the rest of the team, divisions in the locker room, just overall animosity in the locker room. It was good to see a get-right game and kind of build some more positive momentum moving forward, no doubt. Adam, who is stock up for you this week?
Stock up is Oregon. Guys, there it is. Finally.
Good God.
A blowout win. Everyone, including everyone in my Instagram DMs, everyone on my comments, everyone was hitting the panic button on Oregon. I called a lot of heat on social media for keeping them in my top 5 on my week 2 poll I put out. Oregon goes and dominates Oregon State in a rivalry game 49-14. And we saw the Oregon that we thought they'd see. I mean, listen, that we thought we'd see all season. Close wins against Boise State and Idaho in week 1 and 2, and people started to count them out. And I get it, but they found ways to win those games and then finally flip the switch. And what we needed to see, what I wanted to see from Oregon, I saw. They ran the ball at a high level, and their offensive line dominated and looked like an offensive line that could win a lot of games. And then Dylan Gabriel was 20 of 23 or 24 passing, 2 touchdowns, also ran for a long touchdown. Dylan Gabriel doesn't need to be a superhero. And when he doesn't try to win the game with every throw he makes, he's a really, really good quarterback, and that's all he has to be. He needs to be a really, really good quarterback and help Oregon win games and let his playmakers make plays and not try to do too much. So Oregon looks like what we thought they looked like. I had them as my stock up, and now that look at the rest of their season, they go into a bye week and it's go time. They got UCLA. They got Ohio State coming up. I mean, it's go time for Oregon, but this thing's exactly where they thought it'd be, 3-0 going into their bye week, despite some of the panic around the country.
Yeah, I mean, Dylan Gabriel, accuracy was on point, athleticism was on point, but the biggest thing that stood out to me watching Oregon today, and the reason that I'm slow clapping your brilliance with that call, is the turbo button. Like, anybody that's ever played the video game version, you only, and the last couple of weeks, I felt like you're pressing the turbo, and you're like, why is my guy not going faster? Like, Oregon just didn't have the next gear. And all of a sudden today, it was like the minute anybody popped through a route, popped through the line, popped wherever they were going to pop, they got separation from the defender so quickly. Like, it was obvious who the fastest guys were on the field, and I feel like we've been waiting that whole time. It's like they finally finished warming up their hammies, and they were ready to actually run. We saw the best of the speed of Oregon, which I think is an electric part of what's going to make this offense tough to stop. And we saw how good Dylan Gabriel can be when he's locked in with that speed. Chef's kiss to the way that Oregon played in this game, Caroline.
I've been wanting to see this. Since the season started, I've been confused why we didn't see this brand of Oregon football over the last couple of weeks. When Oregon struggled to put Idaho away, when it came down to the wire against Boise State, I'm thinking, where is this Oregon football team that we were all promised would be a national title contender? Where's the Oregon team that I picked to be in the national championship game against Georgia, which, I'd be totally a different story. Where was it? And we finally saw Oregon be able to kind of just put their foot on the gas pedal. And to your point, it started with Dillon Gabriel. I don't know if it was the inability to get up for some of these quote-unquote cupcake games. I don't know if it was more of still a feeling out period with Dillon Gabriel and the rest of the offense. I don't know if it was just a comfort thing with Dillon Gabriel and this system and this playbook, whatever it was. And they just needed time to settle in. I don't know what it was. I don't know if this Oregon team is maybe somewhere in the middle of what we saw in the first 2 weeks and what we saw this week, or if they really truly are what we saw this week. I don't know the answers to those questions, but it was good to finally see Oregon dominate the way that I think we all thought that they would and that they can be.
Yeah, you're right about all of it, and it's electric because you have to have great offense to win in this year's NFL, in this year's college football landscape.
Well, both.
You have to have, both. You have to have great offense. Caroline, we've given you our stock up. Give us your stock up.
Stock up to Alabama's offense. I was very vocal about it last week, about how concerned I would be if I was an Alabama fan. And I understood that the fourth quarter against USF, that was true Bama ball. That was just pure and utter beatdown, 28 points in the fourth quarter alone. But it was, 13 penalties for over 100 yards, 2 holding calls, called back touchdowns. It was sloppy Alabama football. And I thought if they can't get this offensive line figured out, then things might get really tricky for Alabama, especially with Georgia coming to town in just a couple of weeks. But we saw much cleaner play. Only 4 penalties this week from Alabama. They got some guys that were injured back on the offensive line. I saw a Jalen Milroe pass that I think was one of the most beautiful balls I've seen him throw in an Alabama uniform. It was a touchdown pass to Ryan Williams. He's 17 years old, by the way, if you didn't hear that on the broadcast. Crazy. And he is insane. He's absolutely insane. A beautiful touchdown pass to Ryan Williams. I saw more chemistry with Jalen Milroe in the offensive line and these receivers. They ran the ball well. They played clean football. They did what they needed to do, and they did what Alabama does. And I think it was what we saw today. And also the ability to get back and regroup and fix what needed to be fixed from last week. I think that was the most impressive thing to me.
The biggest thing from that game for Alabama was just the development of Jalen Milroe. I mean, Jalen Milroe looks like a completely different player than the one we saw last season. 5 total touchdowns in the game. Like, Jalen Milroe, to me, looks like Michael Penix Jr. looked like in that Washington offense with Kalen DeBoer. Milroe looks much more comfortable in the pocket throwing the football. He's extremely accurate. I also thought the quarterback design run game was different than we saw Alabama do last season. I mean, I think his first, second touchdown on the game for Milroe was a quarterback design run with a lead blocker, getting numbers outside the box for Milroe to really use those legs. So that's the exciting part about Alabama is just the development of Milroe. I also thought that the aggression we saw from Kalen DeBoer was awesome and kind of sets the tone for what Alabama's going to be. There was a point in the second quarter, there was about 30 seconds left in the first half, and Alabama's up 14-3. And instead of going to halftime, when you got the ball on your own 20-yard line, instead of going to halftime and just getting the ball after halftime, DeBoer puts his foot on the gas and says, we got 30 seconds and we got Jalen Milroe. 2 plays later, they're in the end zone on a 75-yard drive with 19 seconds or 20 seconds. So that aggression showed that this is what Alabama is going to be under Kalen DeBoer. We're going to be aggressive. They're going to be dynamic. They're going to be exciting. They're going to be explosive. And then coming out of that game with that aggression, Alabama feels like the same Alabama to me. And 2 weeks from now, though, when they play Georgia, we'll find out for sure who they really are. But I think you got to look at that game if you're an Alabama fan and if you're around that program and be extremely excited about the future and what Kalen DeBoer is going to bring in the post-Saban era.
And that's the true test that comes against Georgia in a couple of weeks. But we saw last season the South Florida game was an incredibly pivotal point for Alabama's season. After that game, after they struggled on the road in Tampa, it basically showed all of Alabama's warts, and they were able to fix it and regroup and become a college football playoff team. I couldn't give this team that same benefit of the doubt because there is so much newness around the program. So many players that have left. Obviously, a new coaching staff. But it was good to see that same kind of pivot from week to week from Alabama and this Kalen DeBoer coaching staff as well.
I'll add one other thing because obviously I've already talked a lot about how wrong I was with Alabama. But Adam, I think you said something here that's really important. I think today was an awakening for the entire college football world as you saw the moment where quarterback and head coach truly got on the same page. Like today felt like the day that Kalen understood exactly how to get the best out of Jalen, and Jalen understood exactly what to do in Kalen's offense. And watching that, it looked so effortless for Jalen to look people off and to get to where he wanted to with his throws. To me, that's a comfort thing. And it felt like the two gentlemen were so comfortable with what each other does well. That's the scary part of it, because there's still plenty of building to do. And I still believe that it's new culture and all of these things. But when you see two guys get on the same page much sooner than I thought they would, that I think is scary. Because I agree with one thing you said that's super important. I think we saw Jalen Milroe today executing Kalen DeBoer's offense even better than Michael Penix Jr. did last year. And the execution of Michael Penix Jr. got Washington to a national championship game. So I think you have to tip your cap to those two being on the same page.
Everyone take a shot. We got a culture reference already. But it came from Fitz and not me.
It still counts.
Still counts.
Just to cap that off, Fitz, Kalen DeBoer is a winner. And I believe that with every part of my being. He did it at Fresno State. He did it at Washington. He did it at Sioux Falls, a D2 or D3 school. And he's going to do it at Alabama. And he's going to look different. He's going to act different. It's going to be a little bit different than what Nick Saban and the way he did it. But Kalen DeBoer's a winner, and he's going to win at Alabama. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that it'll happen. It's going to happen this season.
It
too much
definitely
damn
did.
positivity here, people. Too much positivity. Can we get
some
stock down?
negativity
going? This is gross.
Can we just start throwing up on people now? God,
please. Okay, stop down, Fitz. Be mean to someone, please.
I mean, look, I think there's plenty of people to be stocked down on, but I think it kind of hurts my heart to say this. I know Adam agrees with it, but Kansas. Look, I wore my UNLV hoodie last week, so I got nothing but love for the fact that UNLV pulls off a big win. And by the way, of all the group of 5 teams, UNLV's putting together something right now. They're doing something out there in the desert. But I had higher expectations. I understand the losses that Kansas went through, but Breneman, I really thought this was a big leap year for Leipold and for Kansas. And all of a sudden, it looks like maybe it was leap year in the sense that they forgot it, like they just leapt over it this year, because this is not the same Kansas team.
Man, to be a preseason top 25 team and now be sitting 1-2 with a loss to UNLV at home, 23-20. I mean, I when you look at it, guys, I think Andy Kotelnicki leaving Kansas as offensive coordinator to go to Penn State is one of the biggest departures of the college football coaching cycle. This offense at Kansas and Jalen Daniels, their quarterback, just looks completely out of whack. And Kotelnicki was a huge part of that. And obviously he's not there anymore. I mean, Jalen Daniels had 2 interceptions, and things aren't looking good for Kansas. And they got a tough stretch coming up in their schedule. So I think, I hate to say it, but it might be back to reality for Kansas football. Tough place to win. Not a great recruiting base. I mean, it's they got a little high on themselves there for a little bit. They were feeling themselves. Jalen Daniels was doing well. Lance Leipold is a good coach, but now you're 1-2 and you lost to UNLV. It might be back to the Kansas football we're all used to.
Wait. Poly positive. Maybe UNLV is just a juggernaut now. Let's go.
UNLV to the college football playoff?
It's early, but I'm not saying no. Maybe. I'm not saying no. I'm not saying no. Highest ranked group of 5.
Fitz is saying UNLV will get to the college football playoff before Notre Dame does in the new 12-team playoff.
Oh, my God. If UNLV gets to the college football playoff and Notre Dame doesn't, I'm going to be on one. Y'all just missed 3 weeks worth of shows because I'm just going to talk my talk every single week. Oh, my God. Caroline, give us too much positive again. Give us something else we can be down on.
We cannot get away from the positivity. Truly, this feels a little bit icky. Stock down to LSU's offensive line. I understand I'm saying this after LSU beat South Carolina on the road and overcame a 17-0 first half deficit. I understand that. But this was supposed to be one of the best offensive lines in college football. You got Will Campbell and Emory Jones on the left and right sides. Those are two future first rounders this year. Those are two tackles that are starting their third year of experience in college football in the SEC. And the offensive line really has all season long, but I think it was on full display today. They've struggled to run block. There was a bad snap today. It was a 3-point mistake. Quarterback just wasn't ready for it. Garrett Nussmeier just wasn't ready for it. And DJ Chester, the center, snapped it. South Carolina fell on it. That turned into a field goal. I think that LSU found at least more running identity on Saturday than they have all season long. And the freshman Caden Durham, 2 touchdowns today. He ran the ball really, really well. I think the offensive line maybe found something there, but overall, this offensive line is not as advertised. South Carolina has an incredible defensive front. And I will give credit to South Carolina where credit is due. That might be one of the best defensive fronts in the SEC, but this LSU offensive line should be winning more of those battles if they are as good as everyone was telling me they were.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, Carolina, my stock down as well. I'm going to say both LSU and South Carolina after that game, because that was one of the sloppiest football games I've seen. Yeah. And I think neither of those teams deserve to win that game. And to start with LSU, what you just said, I mean, if they had 2 pick sixes taken off the board that South Carolina ran back, that's a completely different game if they don't get those penalties called. I don't love what Blake Baker, LSU defense coordinator, who just got hired, is doing on defense with Harold Perkins. I think they're getting too cute with a little bit and kind of dropping him into coverage a bunch and putting him at linebacker. Like, he's your best player. Get him after the quarterback. I just don't think this LSU team continuously is having issues closing games out. And then for South Carolina, there were so many chances to win this football game. And now, a few years into Shane Beamer's tenure, you have to win these kind of games. I mean, they were up 17-0 and found a way to lose this game. It was being at home, college game day. This is a program-changing type of game for South Carolina, and they just pissed it away at the end. Had a 4th and 3 jump off sides on 4th down and 3 in one of the biggest moments in the ball game. 13 or 14 penalties I saw that South Carolina had. So, I mean, I watched that game every single play, and I just said, neither of these teams are very good. And both these teams did not deserve to win this game. It was disappointing. Well, let's give credit to LSU for finding a way to win it at the very end. I did think Garrett Nussmeier looked pretty good, but if I'm giving stock report to both these teams, I got them both going down.
I think it's interesting too the way you said that, because at the end of the broadcast, Herbie was doing such the TV thing of saying it's unfortunate someone has to lose this. And I sat there thinking, man, it's unfortunate somebody has to win this. Because you're right. Like, we can watch the rest of what we saw in the SEC today and be clearly reminded that these two teams are not part of the elite of the SEC currently. Like, I think two things can be true, as we always say on these shows in general. Like, yes, somebody had to win the game, and it's a gutsy win for LSU. But I didn't walk away from that confident. Like, I thought both teams, I should say, didn't necessarily utilize the best of what they had all 4 quarters. It just felt like the best teams find a way to have their biggest playmakers make plays when they need them, and neither one of these teams could do that.
It was one of those games that you step away from, at least from the LSU perspective, and you think, I've never felt worse about a win. Because you step away from this game, like, hey, you won the football game. You're 2-1. You just got a road win in the SEC in a college game day packed environment, but it doesn't make you feel very encouraged about what this football team can do moving forward. It doesn't make you feel great about the trajectory of the program under Brian Kelly, because in year 3, I don't feel like the team or the program is in a better spot than where he found it.
Caroline, just to wrap up, and I know you as an LSU person, you love this. I think that if there's one positive for LSU, they found their running back in Caden Durham, and it sounds like they're going to need a running back down the stretch here in the SEC. Last year they relied on Jalen Daniels. Jalen Daniels and Jaden Daniels in the same sentence.
Yeah. There's too much. There's too many.
Yeah. Jaden Daniels a ton last year to run the football and didn't, you rely on the running back as much. But I think Durham's everything you want in running back. Has great vision, contact balance, and played really well. But other than that, not a ton of positives for LSU.
Not a ton of positives, but I think the takeaway from South Carolina is that defensive line is legit. Absolutely legit. All right, that is going to do it for us today. He is Adam Breneman. You can find him on Twitter at Adam Breneman81. He's Jason Fitz at Jason Fitz. I'm Caroline Fenton. You can find me at Caroline Fenton1. Appreciate you guys for stopping by the podcast. Like it, review it, subscribe it, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell the people you love, tell the people you hate, tell everybody about it. We are here every Wednesday and Sunday morning with full reactions to college football. We'll be back Wednesday morning. We are out.